This episode of the Unbuild It podcast is brought to you by Huber Engineered Woods. When we talk about Huber Engineered Woods, you know, we say they make Advantech, we say they make zip system, you know, they have liquid flash and subfloor glue and tape. And I think that most of our listeners are fairly familiar with their product lines. They make really high quality stuff that makes our job easier. But I also wanted to let you know that they have a couple of new products on the market that they just announced at IBSX for 2021. They have Advantech X Factor, and they have a new vapor permeable tape. And I think that those things are very important because they go to show what Huber Engineered Woods is really about. They're innovating and they're problem solving before even builders like myself have asked for those things. That process of innovation has kept them at the top of the game, at the top of the pile, and that process of innovation has caused builders like myself who are focused on durability and energy efficiency and really doing things the right way the first time to believe in them as a company and to use their products. We've been using their original Advantech formula since the late 90s as a company, and we've been using this zip system since 2013. So I think that proves to you my belief in the company. I hope that you'll look into Huber Engineered Woods, and thanks for sponsoring the podcast. Let's talk construction management software and what makes a software good. First, I'd say the ability to tackle the tasks that I need it to do, but more importantly, the ability for my team to comprehend the software, my clients to comprehend the software, and everybody involved to actually want to use that software or that interface. BuildBook could be that software for you. BuildBook is simple to learn and use. It allows for constant communication between you, your team members, and your clients. It doesn't waste time with unneeded features, and you won't have to send your team across country to learn how to operate it efficiently. At the end of the day, BuildBook should reduce your stress and your team's stress as well. BuildBook is an all-in-one construction software for today's builders. Whether you're a one-person operation or a large building crew, BuildBook has plans to fit your budget. They don't have any of those nagging sales calls or tricky upsells or hidden fees. You can sign up for a 10-day free trial with BuildBook so that they can teach you and show you what the value is of their product. You should head over to buildbook.co to get started. Don't forget to mention that you heard it from us, the Unbuild It podcast. That's buildbook.co. Thank you, BuildBook, for your sponsorship.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Unbuild It podcast. Steve Bazek here. I'm joined with my good friends Peter.
Yo!
And Jake.
Hello.
We got probably the best, very best podcast you'll ever hear today.
My gosh.
Yeah.
Is this how to invest in Bitcoin?
No, I'm hosting this, so I'm going out on a limb here, and I'm going to say it's probably the very best podcast you're ever going to hear and listen to. So you really want to listen to this one at least 3-4 times because it is that good. But what's really interesting is I'm hosting it, but Jake has got the list of everything we're going to talk about. I just know the title. We're going to talk about the red herrings of construction today. So all those things that you've heard, maybe you've thought to believe, but hopefully you've questioned. And we're certainly going to question them here. So I'm going to flip this to Jake. We're going to move around the table, and Jake's going to throw us that first red herring.
Sounds fishy to me.
I was waiting to see how long it was going to take for him to throw that in.
That's the whole reason he wanted to call it that. It's just so that he could make that joke. He reverse engineered the show title based off of a joke that he wanted to tell. I like the way that we
transparent.
I like the way we used Steve being the podcast host as today's red herring, where he's actually not hosting. He's just the one that said hello first. Okay, so we just like Steve said, we just made a list before we sat down to record this about the red herrings. I think that we prefaced it with the things that piss us off that we have to talk about that we shouldn't have to talk about, or that we talk about way more than what we need to talk about. So I want to start with the last one that we listed, which is my market won't support that. I can't do that in my market. I don't have clients that are willing to pay for that. I don't think that that's going to work here because of X.
That's a real easy one for me, because when I give talks around the country, the first two questions I ask, and it's targeted to builders and architects. Are any of you in here trying to be just like everybody else in the room? Right? Do you care? Do you want to set yourself apart? Or is it just business as usual and you feel like you should be competing with everybody else in the room? And when no hands go up, then that allows us to move beyond that question about, well, my market won't do that. They won't do that here. It's one of the craziest things that's very aggravating to hear.
We can start that conversation with budget is the one that I always hear. Nobody's going to spend that much money on a house in my market. Nobody's going to pay X for a house. And I think Steve, this might have been you, say, well, is there a Mercedes or BMW driving around in your town? Because you can buy a Hyundai that takes you from A to B at basically the same speed as a Mercedes or a BMW and save a ton of money. But there's somebody in your market that's driving a Mercedes or a BMW or whatever it is, and they've decided that there's a value in spending more money on something.
Yeah. Well, what's really interesting it's funny because of all the builders I know that sit there and say, yeah, that's crazy to spend that amount of money on there. And I say, well, don't you value things? Yeah, but I mean, there's times when you waste money. I go, it's funny because when I think of all the vehicles all my builder friends drive, most of them are like F-350s, all decked out, nice toolboxes, nice cabs, nice trucks. They're certainly not a two-door regular cab, two-wheel drive truck, right?
Yep.
So right there, builders value, and they give me their lines. Well, I need the extra space for my tools, and I got to take the guys and this and that. Well, okay, those are values. There's people that have a bunch of kids that have different lifestyles that, change the way that they think about their houses. And I think it's extremely important that, this goes to that tail wagging the dog conversation, where if you walk in the room and the client is in charge of the conversation, then you're there to just make money, right? Because you're trying to figure out, how do I get this job to make money? You're not offering anything professionally.
Yeah, and I think that, we know that people don't know how to think of their homes as performance-based. And one of the reasons is they're afraid of their buildings, right? They think of buildings as pretty complicated. The industry is full of all kinds of jargon and acronyms that they don't understand. So there's this natural, I think, tendency on the part of clients to be afraid of talking about their homes as performance items because they don't know how their homes perform. And so when I hear people say that won't happen in my market, I think you're missing a huge opportunities to turn on the brain switch in people's head that, the single most important and most valuable and expensive performance item you're ever going to buy or remodel, it's your building. So they just don't know how to talk about performance because we haven't tripped that lever with them.
I also think there's a tendency by homeowners to think of builders as a very simple version of an auto mechanic, where you're either dishonest or you're honest, and either way, you still know what you're doing.
Oh,
and
that's
it's like
really interesting, Jake.
Oh,
yeah.
well, there's a sliding scale, as with any profession. One of my favorite jokes. What do you call the person who got C's in med school? Doctor. Like the idea that just because we have the same job title doesn't mean we are the same. And it's very hard for clients to perceive, just like you were saying. It's hard for them to understand sometimes. It's hard for them to get the knowledge base to understand what's going to make their builder better, what's going to make their builder more trustworthy. Why should they listen to me over why should they listen to Builder X?
So the real question for me is the builder or architect that walks into that room saying that this doesn't work here, is that their lack of knowledge and their cop-out, or do they really believe that?
Mm-hmm.
So that's red herring number one. We all agree that, hey, if you don't know how to talk to your clients about performance and you think you can't do it in your market, why would you be listening to the Unbuilt It podcast, frankly?
And look at me. Steve's used me as an example before. I'm in a market of 150,000.
In so many ways.
150,000 people. Mm-hmm. There are 2 houses that I know of in my market that have triple glazed windows that I didn't build. That's it.
Yeah.
One of them, Steve and I were involved with and decided not to be involved with. And one of them was another architect in Columbia that is very interested in passive house, but it's the only one he's built, And so it's not a market that supports what I do, except for it does because I make a good living and my business is thriving. So clearly it is about education. Okay, so a lot of these from here on out have to do...
Hey, hold on. I'm the host here.
Oh,
okay, so that's the first red herring. Jake, what do we have for number 2?
Let's start at the very... Let's start at the very bottom here and work our way up. Let's talk about a capillary break in footings.
The bottom of the building, right?
Yeah, that was what I meant. Bottom, lower, low, ground level, below grade,
below the belt. The red herring below the belt. Yeah, I probably need to give up on that metaphor. All right, so
Unbelievable.
I'm one of the ones that always says you need a capillary break whenever you have 2 porous materials that are in contact with each other. And if you've got a cold joint between your footing and your below grade concrete wall, better be a capillary break there. So why is that a red herring?
No, why do we need a capillary break there? Let's start with that, Peter.
Because you have 2 porous materials that are in direct contact with each other.
But does it matter if my footing is wet and my wall is not, or does it matter if that concrete is damp at all?
Yeah. So it's a red herring not because the science isn't sound.
There we go.
Then why is it a red herring?
Because of the incidence of it causing a problem is so remarkably low.
Yeah. I mean, I'll be brutally honest here. In 30 years, I think I've put a capillary break on top of a footing twice.
So, number one, we're doing tons of stuff to manage water down there to begin with. We're putting in drain tile. We're wrapping that drain tile in gravel and, filter fabric. And we're putting dimple mats on to wick the water away. And we're doing everything we can to control water as much as possible at that elevation to begin with, or at least I am. So why am I...
I mean, I have some builders, Peter, that'll excavate the hole like 6 inches deeper and then just fill the whole hole with rock and then put the footings on top of that and then backfill the inside of the footings. So I guess, that's in effect a capillary break. Although, unless the drain is below the footing tile or the footing, then you're going to be at the risk of water migrating into the footing and possibly into the wall.
So I think this is really interesting because I'm the only one here that doesn't build anything. And so, my impulse is to say, no, that's not a red herring. If you only have one chance to create a capillary break between the top of that footing and the bottom of the concrete foundation wall, why wouldn't you do it? And I think what I hear you two saying is, you're right, Peter, you only get one chance to do that, but you've never experienced nor heard of a building that has a moisture problem in the basement because they failed to put in a capillary
of wicking.
break. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
I've never done it in the 2 times in 30 years, but I will say this. I don't think I've ever done a foundation without a drain tile at the footing, below the slab, and below the wall footing joint.
And the reason for below is because you're trying to get that standing water, that standing groundwater.
So I guess in thinking about it, Peter, is the only risk I'm at is any migration via capillarity through the footing into the foundation wall.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But here's the flip side. In all of my projects, I am extremely sincere about insulating the inside of my foundation walls. And that's either with polyiso or a closed cell foam, both of which are virtually impermeable. So let me ask you this, Peter. If I put in a drain tile or perimeter drain at the footing, and then I take an impermeable insulation up the wall, I could argue, yeah, okay, maybe my concrete wall does take on some water at different parts of the year. But what do I care? It can't get into the room or into the basement.
Yeah, so this I totally hear you. And so let's say that the footing does get wet in such a way that it becomes wet enough that you get wicking. The wicking can go up into the foundation wall. And then you could say, who cares? There's so much higher capacity of that wall. Yeah, thank you, Jake.
Yeah, who cares?
No, I don't need you ganging up on me. One of you saying who cares is all that we need. So now that water has to travel 8 feet up to the top of the concrete foundation wall before it comes in contact with any wood that does care, right? So what is the other pathway that could happen? Well, if the footing is in direct contact with the basement slab.
Yeah, but remember, as it goes up that 8 foot, chances are the last foot or 2 is exposed to air.
Yeah, so I'm going to totally agree with you that if your only pathway for wicking is up, then the number of instances we have of the first piece of wood to be in direct contact with the foundation wall, that the moisture that's in that foundation wall is coming from a lack of a capillary break between the footing and the concrete wall. Yeah, that's very, very unlikely, particularly since we know that when we get the top of the foundation wall being wet enough to support capillarity, it's almost always getting wet from surface water that's not being managed right, not a connection to the footing.
Yeah, I'm going to go out on a limb here, Peter. If I built a house,
I just have
or
a
designed
picture
and
of you
had
right
a house
now on a tree, way out,
and
on
I'm
the
out
limb.
on like this limb is like maybe an inch in diameter,
Oh,
and I'm out there 20 feet.
Risky.
It's very risky. But if I build a basement or design it and have it built with a builder, and we have a capillarity issue at the 7 foot grade mark of that foundation wall, then I would look at the builder and say, we're both idiots for allowing this to happen. Because I've had projects, my own house, we dug the basement. I wanted it deeper than what it was. I had to actually pull my basement up about a foot because of how we hit water. And it was like, you could sit there and say, I'm just going to battle this perpetual swimming pool for the life of the house, or I'm going to raise it a foot and get out of it for 8 months or 9 months out of the year. And we did that. I also had a house where the homeowners bought the piece of property, came to me, we designed it, had the perk test, and believe it or not, the standing groundwater was about 30 inches below grade.
Yeah, I don't believe
Like, I almost crapped when the guy said, hey, you got a big problem here. Like, there's swimming pool, pond, lake at minus 30 inches.
Yeah.
We pulled the foundation 7 feet out of the ground.
So what I love about this, Steve, is you've fallen into my trap, my red herring trap, because the time that you would worry about this is the one source of water where a lack of a capillary break would be a disaster, and that's if you know that the groundwater table is within reach of your building. Then I think you guys would agree the full Monty would include that capillary break. But if you know that you don't have groundwater as your source of moisture for wicking, then if you starve the straw, right? If you're draining water away from that footing,
and starve the straw, Jake.
You like that, huh?
No, not really, but I just said ooh because I had to say something.
But what about my other consideration that what if the footing gets wet and you have the concern of capillary connection with the slab?
Oh, quit connecting your slab. Make that slab.
I'm going to close this one out because as the host, we have to move on. But I'm going to say this, and I'm going to see if you guys agree with me. If I have a situation where I need a capillary break, I think my decisions should be otherwise. Like, that should be the alarm to switch what I'm doing and either lift the basement, change it to a crawl space, move it to a slab, do something different, and get out of the idiotic realm of trying to put a basement in that situation and use the idea of a capillary break as my fire alarm.
Fair. The thing I love about that, Steve, is in terms of red herrings get caught in boats, and they do have to worry about the water table. So there you go. I'm gonna agree.
Okay, even though our host said he was closing this out, I do have one question for you as well. Can I not just go to 3,500 or 4,000 PSI concrete and greatly reduce my wicking potential as well?
I think you have to go up higher than that. I think you have to probably climb into like a 7,000 plus to start making a difference between water movement.
Fair enough.
That's my understanding, is that 7,000 PSI is where you no longer have to worry about capillarity. But that's a great question, Jake. Because if you're using something like Superior Walls for your basement, which is a 7,000 PSI concrete, capillary breaks are...
But do you know why they use 7,000 pound concrete?
I do.
Because
I don't.
Because their system is based on expediency, right? It's like they only have so many forms. And so the faster they can strip forms and set walls, the quicker. So they use a higher strength concrete so they can remove it from the forms quicker.
But you mean in manufacturing?
Yeah.
The curing and manufacturing.
Oh, wow. I didn't know. That's very interesting. Huh.
Yeah. That's why they moved. They put more concrete in there.
Let's
move on as the host today. Let's move on. Jake, what do we have for number 3?
Okay, so let's stay at the footing. Let's talk about keyways and whether or not you need a keyway between your foundation wall and your footing.
So, okay. I'm going to
So let's very quickly say a keyway a lot of times is just a groove in the footing that will accept the concrete from the wall, and then that way there is a positive Lego type connection between the two to keep the wall from wanting to shift on the footing.
Okay, so we're putting in the keyway because the reason for it is to somehow lock in the structurally the footing to the concrete wall above it, right?
Yep. And I'm going to make an argument that it's unnecessary.
Yeah. So here's where my take on this. One, the first question is, how much of a burden is it to do it, right? So, because does it really save any money or save time? I get it. It's
to not do it.
Maybe
yes,
it is
it's
useless,
a pain in the butt because I got to have a floating 2x4 in the middle of a form where before I didn't have anything.
Yeah, but see up here, guys don't do that. They float their footings, and then they just take a 2x4 and drag a trench through the middle of it. So they don't form it as a keyway. They just drag basically a 2x4 through it and build a keyway that way.
So you just get some guy smoking a Marlboro and no shirt on, walking around with a dirty 2x4.
Well, if it's December, he's got a shirt on. But yeah. So
you guys do footings in December?
Pretty much. I mean, first of January is about, the new year is about when we start questioning. I mean, granted, we can have a week in December where it probably doesn't make sense to pour concrete, but we've been pretty successful right up until about the new year in getting foundations in at some point. I mean, we might have to wait a week or 4 days for a warmer day, but we can get it in.
Allow me to steer our host back to...
Well, I'm going to go back.
Okay.
My structural engineer, when I've had that conversation with him, is, he'll say, does it really matter? I mean, how long does it take? Just drag a 2x4 through it. 2, there's the conversation of, is the building inspector expecting it?
Mm-hmm.
And it's funny because the town I live in, we have a building inspector that's a former concrete foundation guy. So foundations are like his big pet peeve. Keyways are a pet peeve. And so we need to do them. And he doesn't care. Just drag a 2x4, but give me something there to lock the wall in. But the other thing that the structural engineer said, which in my 30 years has certainly migrated to become more of the norm, where when I started out it wasn't, is reinforcing bars coming out of the footing and into the wall. Because if you have those in there, then it's arguable that, yeah, you don't need a keyway. And in your case, Jake, most of the walls that we do down there have some type of footing reinforcement that rises up through there. So yeah,
so my keyway is steel.
Right.
That I'm already putting in the wall. So I would make the argument.
But we have builders here in New England that like putting a bar at the bottom of the wall and a bar at the top of the wall is excessive reinforcement.
So in other words, the keyway, that connection is necessary, but it doesn't have to be a keyway. It could be steel.
Yes.
Which in my market, it's steel, always. At every foundation I've ever seen.
So I think the three of us are agreeing that the structural need to connect lateral resistance of the footing to the below grade concrete wall, you don't need a keyway to do that. And there are other elements like steel reinforcement that sort of negate the need for a keyway.
Yep.
Yeah, I think we need some type of anti-slip technology there.
Yeah.
Okay.
Cool.
So
wait a minute. No, Steve's
gonna
the host.
Yeah, so that closes out that one. Jake, we are on to number 4.
So I think the amusing, at least to myself, way to introduce this one is that bulk water in buildings is very important. Movement of air in buildings is incredibly important, only second to water. It's very important that we think about our insulation, our thermal management, but let's spend the next 2 hours talking about vapor.
Oh my God. Don't even get me started.
So number one, I want to hear a theory from Peter as to why people do exactly what I just did. All these other things are way more important and way more difficult to manage for, but for some reason we're going to spend the entire presentation talking about vapor management instead of bulk water or air movement or,
Well, the interesting thing is if I solve for those 3, the vapor becomes even less of a problem. But I've had conversations with people where they talk about vapor barrier as the reason to hold back Niagara Falls in their house, right?
Yeah.
Like, where the hell do you think all this moisture is coming from?
Yeah, well,
now granted, there's some high load areas, but Peter, give us the numbers.
Well, I love this as a red herring because I think what you're saying is we should be worrying about the vapor performance of an assembly, not because it's how buildings get wet, but because if they get wet, it's one of the few ways that we can get them dry. And
bingo, bingo, alarm, 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 alarm. Great answer, Peter.
Oh, boy, I'm blushing. Like I'm as red as a herring, maybe.
We're going to have to, I'm going to get one of those door clicker things to track how many people are in a building, and you're going to get a specific number of jokes in one podcast, and I'll just show it to you on the camera so you can go,
well,
oh.
And my wife would say, those aren't
one.
jokes. Come on, don't encourage them. Well, so we do know that even in cold climates, the number of buildings that get into trouble from strictly vapor pressure is incredibly small. And it gets even smaller if we move out of cold climates. So yeah, this is a real red herring. If you're worried about how your building's getting wet from vapor, and you're not building a natatorium, side note, indoor swimming pool, or you're not building a sauna room inside a cold climate building, then you're in real trouble because, as Steve said, you should be focusing on bulk water, air, thermal, then vapor. And then Steve, I think the way that you like to think of it or express this is, I do worry about vapor, right? But not as a strategy for managing how my buildings get wet.
Yeah, I look at vapor transmission not as necessarily a preventative measure, but as a solution should something fail.
There you go.
Right? So you design the detail to solve for condensation. But then you ask yourself, well, what happens if something went wrong? How does this assembly going to dry? And then the vapor profile becomes eminent in how does it solve my problems when all else fails.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I was doing an architect client of mine relatively recently, and he's in a really mild climate, and when he was kind of getting knotted up with concerns related to the vapor permeability of a particular layer, and I said, look, think of the vapor permeability of this layer not from how your building's going to get wet, in particular because this climate was so mild, but if it gets wet, how it will dry. And it was a big shift for him, right? Because as an architect, he had read enough about building science to be really concerned about the vapor permeability material for how the buildings get wet. And to shift and think about how the building's going to dry was a whole new framework for him. So it's a good red herring for us to work on.
Yeah, it's a tough one for me because so many people treat it like it's this major problem. And I think when you focus on that, well, first of all, I can't tell you how many times I've sat in the back of the room while somebody else was presenting, and then they start talking about moisture and these problems that we're trying to solve for. And I raise my hand and say, where the hell is all this moisture coming? Where is this moisture monster that you speak of? Where is it coming from? Right? Because
God, I hate to present while he's in the room.
If you manage the moisture in the house, then you're not being challenged, right? The idea is don't allow it to challenge.
Yeah.
I mean, Joe would always say there's moisture content in every ounce of air that exists. Some's high, some's low. But who cares? All you care about is when it changes from a vapor to liquid water. That's when it becomes a problem. As a vapor,
well,
who cares if stuff
and you can go one step further. It's not that I care about when it changes from vapor to water. It's when I care about that when it's causing a problem too. Like it's one more tier down the pyramid of cares.
Right.
That's the title of my first album, by the way. Pyramid of Cares.
Pyramid of Cares.
Having said that, when we build really super airtight homes and we don't educate the occupants about how important it is for them to manage moisture, right? Because if you build a really, really airtight building and you have clients that don't understand how important the moisture generation they could be involved in, they need some guidance too on this issue, not just from a design and specification, but from a home operation perspective.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, I have a bunch of personal examples that, I tend to live by that. I'm not going to go off the rails here and try and get everybody to believe that we shouldn't ever worry about vapor. But I got to tell you, I have some projects where if I wrote down the metrics of what we did, you'd say, oh my God, Steve, that is doomed for failure. You're going to have vapor problems. It's going to be huge. And I know for a fact we don't have problems in those buildings because a couple of them we've been in to open up walls and do different things. So we don't have issues. So I think controlling it and controlling the surface temperature and controlling the humidity in the structure is far more important than I don't know. It's one of those things too where you look at.
Now we're still talking about vapor, by the way.
We are still talking about vapor, but who's talking about that problem, right? Like it just seems the people that want to talk about it the most have a very good interest in delivering barrier systems, let's say. Right? Where I say control the temperature, control the air tightness, control the relative humidity, and give it a path to dry out if it had to.
Hear, hear.
So, that concludes number 4. Jake, please swipe open curtain number 5 and reveal the next red herring.
Let's talk about windows. There's only 2 types of windows.
Let's talk about windows, baby. Let's talk
those
about
that
you.
haven't leaked yet and those that are leaking.
All windows
Ouch.
leak. All windows leak. It's not if, it's when.
Which, before we debunk that idea, I will say that is a fantastic way to approach things, though.
Yeah. I think you should live in fear with windows. But it's the kind of fear that forces you to do the right thing and be excessive at the right thing, but not truly believe it, right? Like, I believe that all windows will leak eventually, but I'm okay with it leaking in 500 years. I'm not okay with it leaking in 5 years. So my fear pushes me out to a pretty excessive time frame.
So the red herring here is that all windows will leak, but one of the arguments that we were talking about earlier is that, if it has a 5-foot overhang on it, no, it won't. We've put it in a position to succeed. So we're talking about design and proper installation can prevent that idea that all windows will leak.
Right. Or putting that, flanged window in the outside plane of a wall that has a small parapet because it's this ultra modern house, and putting that on a coast, right, of Maine or something. And then saying, oh yeah, we're and not really caring about the window installation or details. Yeah. There's what's really interesting, and this is one of those all windows leak stories. There's a prominent book out there. I'm looking at my shelf here, and I know I have it. But on the cover is this house of a very prominent architect. It's a beautiful house, but we've been to that house and investigated it. Guess why we investigated it? Because almost every friggin' window in the house leaked. But it looks good, and it made the cover of a book.
Well, in that famous story from Frank Lloyd Wright at one of his buildings where he had clerestory windows that were really hard to flash at the top, and the homeowner calls him at like 10 o'clock and says they're having a dinner party, and he said, "Damn it, the windows are leaking, the clerestory windows right underneath the dining room table. What do we do?" And supposedly Frank Lloyd Wright says, "Move the dining room table."
I can't imagine the audacity to call my architect at 10 o'clock at night, but I guess at that point in history, if you had the money to hire Frank Lloyd Wright, audacity was probably something you had as well.
So, Steve, what you're saying is it's only the windows that see the water that can leak. So if you use your design tool, you can protect an awful lot of windows.
So let me break this down for you.
You're going to unbuild it for me?
I'm going to use my idiot scale. 10
from Jake to Peter.
No. 10 being the total idiot, 1 being, probably never an idiot. When it comes to windows, you want to make decisions somewhere 3 and below, right? If you start making window installation decisions on 6 and above, then you deserve to have your windows leak. You deserve to be sued. You deserve everything you get. Because in our day and age, you should know better by now. You should just definitely know better. There are so many details. I have at least a dozen window details circulating in public that can be seen for free, that I'm not saying they are the way to do it, but they certainly suggest a successful approach. So don't, when it comes to windows, don't be an idiot.
That's a good place to start. Don't be an idiot.
All right, we're rolling. Number 6, Jake, lift up that overhead door. What do we got?
So this one's actually kind of multiple red herrings in one, or myths in one, and it has to do with ACH 50 and the 5 ACH. Hey,
is that like a double? When you say multiple red herrings, right? Is it multiple red herring? Like a bunch of red herring? Or is multiple red herrings like a lot of a lot?
I don't know.
Wow, Steve.
You got me on that one. You got me on that one.
I've never heard you do such serious wordplay.
I know you guys don't think I pay attention, but my scrutinization
I know you barely pay attention.
Nano level, okay? Did you hear me? For the record, I want to see this one posted all over IG. My scrutinization is at the nano level.
Okay.
Well, for scrutinizing language, it's scrutiny, not scrutinization, Steve. Just couldn't resist that.
I hate you both. For the record.
So if you live in climate zone 1 or 2, the code is 5 air exchanges per hour at 50 pascals of pressure. But if you live in 3 and up, it's 3 air exchanges per hour at 50 pascals of pressure. And for some reason, because I live in a cooling dominated climate, I want my house to be leaky. Or I don't care about air leakage if I'm only paying to cool the air inside my house, but not if I'm paying to heat the air inside my house.
So the question is, why isn't climate zone 7 or 8 1 ACH 50?
The question is, why isn't it one thing across the board in my mind? Why isn't there one standard for the entire country? Because we're all paying to condition our air except for a couple really small pockets.
Hear, hear. So what you're saying, Jake, is if paying for cooling your building is just as important as paying for heating your building, why would you relax the air tightness in hot, humid compared to cold and dry?
Yep.
Yeah. Because I can think, because we get this question all the time. When Steve and I do stuff that's nationally oriented for building science, we say, hey, the one thing that doesn't change from climate to climate is air tightness. Air tightness is always important. Even though in Hawaii, you could argue that the building's open enough of the time. But even if you close up that building for a little bit of the time, then it becomes important that the building be airtight. Yeah,
that was that's exactly what I said last week to Caesar. Caesar said, hey, don't forget the presentation you're giving next week is to Climate Zone 6. So it needs to be geared towards Climate Zone 6.
You talked to Caesar?
And I said, Caesar, it's about air sealing. It doesn't change. I'm not changing anything in the presentation. That's it.
Yeah. So I don't know why the code, I mean, I have to admit, I haven't researched the issue of why does the code relax that?
Because they're wrong.
Yeah,
that's why it does that. But when we start chasing, so we're in agreement. That's an easy one for us to just go, yeah, why wouldn't it be the same? So let's continue the blower door myth thing down to the other thing that we already talked about.
Let's talk about air tightness. Let's talk about.
That's twice he's burst into song. It's because he had a vacation. I now get it. Steve had a vacation last week, and that's why he's singing during the Unbuilt It podcast.
The only person that we know that goes on vacation to Atlanta. No offense, Atlanta.
It was Alabama.
Offense.
It was Alabama.
Okay. There you go.
It was Bama, not even Alabama.
And the connection here is that in Alabama, that's Climate Zone 2, and you get to build to 5 ACH 50. Does Alabama?
And so
there's no chance that Alabama follows the latest IRC, right?
There's no chance. Does Alabama have a building department?
Sorry, I'm sure we have.
Maybe Mobile.
Remember, questions at unbuilditpodcast.com if you wish to.
For all you Alabama residents, we love you.
So very quickly, let's talk about how awesome I am at air sealing buildings. And even though I've only gotten to 0.35 ACH 50, Steve's gotten a couple of the houses that he was involved in to 0.18 ACH 50. So he must be way
1.6.
better.
Let's get it right.
At air sealing houses or having builders air seal houses than I am. This is another one of our red herrings.
Yeah. So, I guess, does it matter? I mean, they're numbers, they're bragging rights. Putting that number up in a presentation is certainly, a showstopper. But the reality, when I talk to clients about the real air tightness, I tell them, let's strive to get under 1.5. If we get under 1, I think we've done a really good job. If we get under 0.6, we've done an exceptional job. Anything under 0.5 is noise, right? Because the difference between 0.3 and 0.15, it could have been the person, it could have been doing the test, it could have been the calibration, it could have been the way they installed the damn shroud in the door opening.
Yep.
Was the difference between those two numbers. So
when you say noise,
does that
we're going
really
to agree that it doesn't matter.
It doesn't.
So
matter.
It's interesting. When we move from 3 to 5, we're saying that's pretty important.
It matters a lot.
10 times less than that, 0.3 to 0.5, really, from a performance standpoint and a building science standpoint, we're really talking about really a non-issue.
Yeah, I mean, point. Let me see. What is this? 0.25 on a say 7,000 square feet of surface area equates to about 1/3 of a business card, I believe. Mm-hmm. And to take that 0.25 and go to 5 maybe takes it to a business card in cumulative air leakage. Now, in your mind, think about throwing a business card on the 7,000 square foot deck of a single story house. It almost disappears.
Yep.
And if I cut that business card into thirds and threw just 1/3 down versus the one business card, do I really see a difference? Probably not.
Yep. It's the jump from 3 to 0.6. That's what matters.
So everybody out there, Steve's word of wisdom, because I'm the host and I can pronounce my word of wisdom. I say 5, 3, whatever, but I would use 1 as, like, if you're getting under 1, you're doing a really good job. If you're between 1 and 2, that's acceptable, but there's still some fruit there to pluck. Strive for the 1.
I wonder if just one more thing before we wrap up the red herrings. I wonder if perhaps they relax it to 5 so that they can also say that you don't need a whole house mechanical ventilation system. Because is it true in the code that when you slip from climates or situations where you're not held to 3, do they also relax and say at 5 you don't need whole house mechanical ventilation?
You know what's interesting? Jake, was that our last one on the list?
It is. No? We have one more?
We still have one more? Because you just brought up, I can't believe we didn't bring up this red herring. I mean, come on, you just hit on it. What am I thinking, Jake?
Are we talking about houses need to breathe?
There you go. Right? How did we miss
I have a
that
new
on
way
the
of
list?
discussing that. Houses do need to breathe. I agree. But I'm going to do it on my terms, and I'm going to do it mechanically rather than just let the house leak.
Yeah, I just tell people, think of your body as the house, right? We have dedicated inputs, outputs. Our airstream goes in, it goes to a dedicated filtration system. Wouldn't you want your house to operate the same way? Imagine if we had just uncontrollable air seeping through our skin wherever it felt like going. The amount of disease or whatever that would be able to come into our bodies.
Bypasses your filtration system. I don't know the answer to your question, by the way, Peter. We kind of glazed over.
I don't remember his question.
But I love this analogy because if buildings need to breathe, then rather than breathing through lungs, they breathe through walls. That's like insects, right? Insects don't breathe through lungs. They breathe through their body. And that's why you don't have an insect bigger than about 3 inches long, because the surface area to volume ratio means that they would asphyxiate if they were larger. So yeah, if you want to go ahead and breathe through your walls, knock yourself out. But then you're thinking like a bug.
Wow. Wow. We're not even going any further on that one. All right, Jake, roll us into the last of the multiple red herrings.
A code-built house is automatically crap. You build to code, you must build crappy houses.
Yeah, it's funny. When we were making the list, I want to hear this. I want to hear the defense of the code-built home.
Well, so let's start with the idea that you can build any house and it be crap. You could build one that people would agree is above code, like we just talked about, but you put the flanged window all the way out at the face of the wall with a parapet over top, and you can still do crap, even though you're using upgraded materials and larger insulation packages and things like that. So let's start there. Just because you're building above code doesn't mean that you aren't still building crap. Code is health and safety. It means that the house isn't going to fall down. It means that it's going to be safe for the occupants. It means that, or the guidelines have that intention. So you can follow those things, and you can have a weather-resistant barrier. You can have a house that's mechanically ventilated. You can have a house that doesn't have very many air exchanges per hour, and be building to a code minimum and not be building absolute crap. I would make the argument that it is way more difficult to build something that is close to the code minimum that is going to last a long time and be incredibly comfortable. But I think that we get into this argument where people use the idea that they build above code, they build better than code as a sales point. And it's not exactly, they don't exactly go hand in hand, is what I'm saying.
So are you saying that that a code built home can still be a quality home? I think that's what you're saying.
That's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, okay. I totally get that. That makes perfect sense.
Like, I don't see Mike Girton using tons of things that would be greatly exceeding code, but I think that we would all agree that Mike builds a good house. How about that?
I think it depends on how you define not even define, but how you choose the components.
Agreed.
Right? Because you could say, okay, I'm gonna outline 2 code built houses. I can go to Home Depot and I can find the cheapest OSB and the cheapest weather resistive barrier and put those up on a house. And then I can fill them with an air permeable bad insulation, the cavities. Okay. And absolutely employ no, air tightness measures. Mm-hmm. And chances are I'm building to code. Or I could take that same assembly, upgrade the OSB to a zip system, properly roll the tape and flash it, upgrade the insulation system, and block your ears for all you foam haters. But let's just say I blow 3 inches of closed cell in the wall. Not that I'm advocating it, but there is going to be a distinctive difference in the number of air tightness when you do the air tightness test between the air permeable bat and a wall that's sprayed with closed cell insulation. And so both of those wall systems meet code. Both of them have a slightly different price tag, but they were about choices and knowledge of systems more than they were about does it meet code or not.
Yeah, so there you, Steve, to make the connection to quality constructed and choice of materials, quality materials, right? So that's sort of the I can build a home to code with quality materials and quality methods of construction, and that's still a quality home.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Cool.
What's interesting to me too is if you tested both, or if you put both of the houses out there for duration, the crappy air permeable insulation, bad weather resistive barrier OSB is basically a vapor open wall. So it's going to cost you a bunch of money from an energy efficiency standpoint. But as far as durability goes, it's probably going to last a pretty damn long time because it's such a crappy wall. It has the ability to dry out. And if it gets wet a little, who cares? It's going to dry in a heartbeat.
Yep.
Because it is so badly built that air's moving right through it.
Yeah, well, if it's poorly managed from a bulk water perspective, I think it's going to lose that battle. But that gets back to design, quality of design.
Yep. So,
but
Steve,
well, I was just going to say, didn't we have a discussion about with homeowners on the code built house, or didn't we say we were going to talk about something there? Am I missing something? No.
Just from the builders say, well, I build above code, so I built a better house.
Yeah, I mean, I can't. The funny thing is, go look at production home builders marketing material, right? Enhanced R21 insulation, and all they've done is go from an R19 bat to an R21 bat,
and add the word.
But it's enhanced. An enhanced insulation system, right? Because they have R3, but they're using the crappiest windows and flashing system available, known to man and women. I'm trying to be politically correct, unlike you guys here in this new age. And
I'm not touching that one. I'm not touching that one at all. You can go down that path on your own.
That was a Steve Basic red herring.
But yeah, it's funny how a lot of people just sit there and say, "Oh yeah, I build to this or build to that." And the last thing I'll leave you with is, when it comes to code built homes, it's code built, but it's also knowledge of what you're doing. because we've all had conversations with people that say, oh yeah, I build really good homes. Oh, really? Oh yeah, damn near passive house type homes. Oh, okay. What kind of air tightness numbers you get? Oh, we don't test for air tightness. We build really good houses. We don't even have to test. Well, then how do you know? How do you know what you're doing if you don't have the knowledge to make an acceptable decision, right? So it's one of those things where you have to kick off the whole system with some type of baseline and expectation. And then, as you say, Jake, you have to validate it and make sure that was my baseline and expectations achieved, exceeded, or did I fall short? And do I need to readjust? Right? That's how we build better.
So in this session, Jake, Peter, and Steve have schooled on red herrings.
Another one. How did he get that one in there? I didn't even see that coming. That was impressive.
I feel like we've filleted this topic.
I have a bone to pick with you on that, Steve.
Goodness. We have a rule that we don't edit the podcast for content. It just is what it is. I think I might change that rule after this episode. We might have to ditch some of this fish humor.
Could be just a fish tail, Peter.
Okay. On that note, we want to say thank you for listening to the Unbuild It podcast today, where we discussed not fish, but building. You learned a little bit about building, hopefully, and a lot about Peter's sense of humor. If you have questions, don't hesitate to email us, questions@unbuilditpodcast.com. Please don't forget to subscribe, tell a friend, share our content. We're trying to share this with as many people as possible, and that comes on your shoulders as your responsibility to help us spread the word. Leave a 5-star review on iTunes, if at all possible. And say goodbye, gentlemen. Thanks for listening today.
Hey, as today's host, I would like to thank you all for joining us today. Steve Bazek signing off.
See you guys.